My next guest is Jeffrey Benson. He has over 40 years of experience as a teacher, mentor, and school administrator. His passion is supporting schools to be more successful with more students. He is an internationally known author, including the books Hanging In, Strategies for Working with Students Who Challenge Us Most, 10 Steps for Managing Change in Schools, Teaching the Whole Team Everyday Practices that Promote Success and Resilience in School and Life, Improve Every Lesson with SEL, and his newest book, Hacking School Discipline Together. Jeffrey leads school change initiatives, facilitating interdisciplinary teams that convert long-standing dilemmas into cutting-edge growth and community building, and creating more inclusive school and classroom cultures. He is a member of the ASCD faculty, is frequently published in education journals, and speaks at conferences on such topics as working with challenging students, integrating SEL into everyday practices, restorative practices, decision-making skills for leaders, and the science of learning and teaching. Well, welcome to the podcast, Jeffrey.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Well, I'm excited to dive right in to some of these topics that you are such an expert on. Let's start off with the question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and what you call out.
So I was thinking about that. First, I want to say that I have one superpower, which is I've met and kept great mentors in my life who have helped me be a good principal, teacher, dad, whatever. And one of them said to me, "It's pompous to say you're an expert. It's okay to say you have expertise." So I feel like after all these years, I have expertise to give back, but we're all still learning on the job. Sometimes an expert sounds like you've sealed up. So going to take us back to when I was principal of a school, and my supervisor um, had a new supervisor, and she was getting on my nerves, and I couldn't figure out how to work with her. And I kept time after time not getting what I needed from her. And I was thinking of leaving, even though I love the school and I love my job, I love the staff, I love the kids. It was just too hard. I couldn't do the things that I wanted to do in terms of initiatives, which is my favorite thing about being in school leadership. It's a chance to help create a bigger and broader school culture. So I went to one of my mentors and I was telling her about it. And I'll be more polite than she was with me that day. She said, "Are you acting like an adolescent who's always proving that your parents are inadequate to you? Why don't you scaffold your boss to be supportive to you?" And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, "Jeffrey, you're so good at individualizing lesson plans for kids. And you're good at when you're supervising teachers, thinking of where they are in the arc of their careers and how to support them moving forward. Don't treat all your bosses the same. Why don't you write an IEP for your boss?" And that was a moment that I've used in my coaching, my teaching. I have an article coming out in the ASCD journal in March about this. I was like, oh, right. I could, instead of continuing to make my boss be in a position to turn me down for my efforts, to support me. So I had to learn, and I thought about this, that my prior boss, who I love working for, if I said, "Hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z," my boss would say, "Okay, just don't break the law and just don't bankrupt the schools. I'm paying you to do that stuff. Go for it." My new boss, if I came and said, "Hey, for instance, I've been thinking about the English curriculum. Our reading scores are a little low. I want to look at some new literacy materials. I've spoken to a couple of different schools. I've been looking at stuff." And my new boss would say to me, "Why am I hearing about this now? I can't have heard about this before." So I learned with this new boss, who had been making me feel like I was banging my head against the wall, that I had to go in at the beginning of my thinking and say, "I'm just starting to notice this." And although it wasn't as free a ride as with my prior boss, sometimes my new boss had guys I hadn't had. Or I learned, and this is both like strategic and because I was trying to do my job well, to a little bit lie to my boss. And I would come in and say, "Hey, I'm just thinking about the reading curriculum," when actually I'd been thinking about it for 3 weeks. And I'd been looking up stuff and would guide him. Like if he said, "So do you know what's out there?" I'm like, "Yeah, actually I'd heard about this thing I've been looking into." Um, again, I didn't like that new boss as much as my old boss, but I realized I could work with that person if I stopped thinking of each boss as a gear in a machine. And I realized this too in my work as a school leader. anytime you talk to someone above you in the hierarchy in a school system, you always know they have more authority than you. That's never not part of the conversation. And so I realized with the people I work with that they felt that way about me. And so I had to tell them, by the way, here's the things I like to do in my as a boss. Here are the things, the way to work with me, so that they weren't always trying to figure me out like the way I had to figure out all my other bosses. And I realized too, I got some compassion for bosses, which not everyone wants to go down that road. But if you're trying to create change, you have to work with your bosses. That everyone's learning on the job. That when I got into my 40s, let's say, a lot of my peers and I got into leadership positions.
Mhm.
Partly that was because we were reasonably good, partly because we were more often than not tall white men who get in ahead on all of those criteria.
Yeah.
And the other reason is that the people who had been in leadership positions before us had either died or retired, and we were sucked up into there was a vacuum. We needed new leaders, this next generation. We didn't know what we were doing so well, any more than a good teacher is good until 3 or 4 years.
Mhm.
It takes about 3 or 4 years to become a good school leader to really understand it. Um, so it helped me, my conversation with my mentor and that aha of writing an IEP for my boss to realize everyone has their quirks, everyone has their weaknesses, everyone has a style. And unless my boss is toxic, which
Mhm.
most of them aren't, they're working real hard. They're trying to figure it out. If I can integrate my needs to their style, I'm more likely to get my needs met.
Yeah, I mean,
Quick and
that's so interesting.
Mhm.
Like when you're talking about like that IEP piece, I think, you wouldn't have really thought of writing an IEP for a boss. Like, but that's
Right,
just like an aha moment, I think. And like you said, that maybe changed how you were thinking about how your boss reacted to things.
right. And if the people watching, by the way, if you don't want to wait till the article comes out, if you write to me at my website, jeffreybenson.org, I'll send you, I have a list of questions that we've generated through the years of my doing this of ask your boss about this, ask your boss about this, or think, even if you don't ask them, think about how does your boss like to get feedback? How open is your boss to you checking in again if you haven't heard back from them lately? How early in the process do you want your boss? Does your boss want to be on board? Um, and then there's another critical question in that, which is sometimes if your boss isn't toxic, and let's say Dana, you were my boss, I could go to you and say, Dan, I think I know how you like me to work with you. Is this true? I'm
Mhm.
realizing that you would like to be on board really early in the process. So I want to make sure I'm working well with you. Is that right? And those are wonderful conversations because A, your boss feels noticed, affirmed, and clearly you're making an effort to work with them well. They want to be efficient too. They don't want to have bad relationships.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of my work in schools now is trying to help people talk up and down the hierarchy.
Sure.
Because if we're going to do school reform well, we've got to use each other's authority in the school. There's things teachers and staff members can do in schools that the admin can't.
Mhm.
And there are things admin can do that teachers can't. And we
Mhm.
have to pool our power
Yeah.
to create better schools.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to, like
Mhm.
you said, pull the power, really learn how to work together because there are certain people who can only do certain things at the school. You have a wide variety of experience in terms of working with leaders, working with schools. I wanted to dive a little bit into trauma informed practices and just some of the kids that you've worked with and what you've learned from that helps you now in your current work with school admin.
So informed by those wonderful, yes, traumatized and still wonderful kids. So I'll talk about a couple of things about working. And again, there's a line in from the world of special ed. What's necessary for some kids is good for all.
Mhm.
That the practices we've done with trauma-informed classrooms in schools really still make classrooms better for all kids. And there's a umbrella phrase I use a lot is
Mhm.
how do we make safe and brave classrooms for kids? So that they feel like their brains are welcome, their ideas are welcome, because they're not always with everyone else, and yet they're part of the group. Um, So a couple of things. One is that no single teacher should be burdened with this notion that you can cure a kid. There are no
Mhm.
cures. That our goal as adults is to set up a safe and brave culture every day in our class into which kids come. And then they do their ups and downs, they struggle or whatever. And the goal is for me to say, I dealt well with this kid who was having a hard time.
Mhm. Mhm.
What I don't want teachers to feel is if the kid has a bad day, then correspondingly, I had a bad day. I want us to
Sure.
feel like the kid had a bad day. I did good professional work. I still need to go home and exercise and relax and get that out of my system because it still is hard. But you can't fix the kid. What you do is every day you set up that space in which the kid comes in and feels safe to take risks. There's an article on my website, as well as you can just Google it, because it's the first article I wrote that kind of went semi-viral. I'm not saying it went as viral as a Beyonce song, but it's out there a bunch. And it's called The 100 Repetitions.
Mhm.
And it's this notion that kids who have struggled and are struggling may need 100 times for us to hang in with them until they grow into their new behavior. Because people don't change, they grow.
Yeah.
So over time, I know that I'm going to continue to do good repetitions with a kid who's struggling. Now, it may be that I know the kid isn't going to be fixed with me. I get a kid who's really hurting. And my goal is if Danny, you're the teacher next year, if I've done 25 repetitions that are
Mhm.
good with the kid, you're going to get the kid at repetition 50 instead of 25. You pick the kid up there and you're going to take the kid as long as that kid can go with you that year, continuing to help the kids grow into new behaviors, into new skills. Um, and then as a staff, we get to say, if like, for instance, I'm a principal and I see you working with a kid who's having a hard day, I can go up and say, Dana, that looked like a good repetition. You did your
Mhm.
job well there. That was a hard day for the kid. You did exactly what that kid needed. Um, that's why the first book's called Hanging In. We hang in through the kid's development.
Yeah.
It's helpful to do it as a team, really important to do it as a team so we can have each other's backs and say to each other, well done.
Mhm.
You know, the kid's getting better. It's a slow, long ride the kid's on, but you're doing your job.
Mhm. Mhm. And that ties a little bit into the conversation about SEL. And I know many schools have used SEL a lot more during the school day. I've seen more elementary schools use it than secondary, but and a lot of time in secondary, it is just kind of focused in on that homeroom or advisory time. But
Right,
like, how would you say that supports learning, especially if we tie it into our content area classes and just make it a part of our class period?
right. It's so much part of kids learning. So a little bit what we know, some from the last 20 years of brain science, neurology has been incredible for understanding how people learn, how brains
Sure.
work. I mean, people have tried for eons to know what goes on inside these skulls and had a lot of crazy ideas. And we know more than ever. And I often think that the two groups of people who should know how brains work best are brain surgeons and teachers,
Mhm.
because we're both trying to affect what's going on in those neural networks. So what we do know, there's many pieces to this. One is that if you don't have skin in the game, if you don't have an emotional, personal connection to curriculum, it's unlikely you're going to go the extra yard, the
Mhm.
extra time to really learn it well. I mean, in some ways, we accept so much mediocrity in school, kids getting C pluses, B minuses, and we often say they could do better than that. But most kids don't see their connection of them to the curriculum. So there are lots of things to think. How do I get a kid to say it is within your goal set to
Mhm.
do this work that might not immediately seem important? So I'm trying to get you to figure out, I'll use a high school example, how to isolate Z in a trinomial.
Sure.
Okay, no one is going to be asking you that when you're walking down the street. No one's going to ask you that at home. But there are lots of times in life we have to solve complex problems. And where do we give up? And where do we have our skills? And what are your strengths to solving a complex problem? I think your goals in life include you having to work out some hard things. So for some of you in class, math is going to be your thing.
Mhm.
For others of you, this is an incredible exercise in isolating variables. We talk about that a lot in life.
Mhm.
There are things that are constants in life. Your parents. What are constant about your parents? And what is variable in how your parents behave?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we do in math too. We think, what are the constants? What are the variables? How can you break down a problem? How can you break down a problem with your parents so you
Hmm.
can get what you want with them and from them? Um, we have to make that effort. And if we do, kids are surprisingly willing to go farther down that road with us. So
Hmm.
part of SEL is having personal goals.
Yeah.
I'll give you another notion about that. Part of SEL is advocating for what you need. So in
Hmm.
classrooms I work with from pre-K to high school, developmentally at different stage, you scaffold differently at different ages, of course. And I've been lucky in my long career. I've actually worked in pre-K through high school, graduate school, adult ed. Do kids know what they can advocate for in your class?
Hmm.
Make that explicit. Can I ask the teacher, wait, can I hear the directions again? Can I have a finished model that I can work from? Can I have that translated?
Hmm.
Um, can I work with Dana because I work well with Dana? Can
Hmm.
I have a little longer to do this because I know I need little longer to do this well and I want to do it well? I want kids to know that they can advocate for those needs. Going back to what's good for kids with special needs, what's necessary for kids with special needs is good for all. In a lot of IEPs, we have accommodations. That's actually everyone should be asking for those accommodations. They're
Hmm.
really helpful. I don't want students in any of your classes to be passive. So I imagine a school system in which kids starting in kindergarten, first grade, second grade are told how to advocate for what their needs are.
Hmm.
By the time they get to middle school and high school, I've got kids who come into my room knowing what that menu is, having been affirmed and praised for using it, having seen it modeled. I don't want kids to ask me, sitting quietly in the back, asking me to read their minds.
Sure.
So part of setting up safe and brave classrooms is where it's a brave place where it's not so brave to say to the teacher, wait, could you repeat the directions? I don't want kids to feel like that's a brave thing to do. I want
Hmm.
them to think that's a natural way we roll in schools.
Yeah.
So SEL is intimately involved in all the parts of a lesson plan. Because there are so many moments. I'll give you one more example. May I? Yes, end of class. We should stop the class, stop the official handing out of more information about 2 minutes early and stop and say, okay, everyone, let's be quiet for a moment.
Hmm.
Think for a moment. Turn to your partner. What do you think was important in today's lesson? Share that with each other. Not what do you think the teachers think is important?
Sure.
What do each of you want to hold on to?
Hmm.
Take a moment. Was there anyone in the class today who helped us learn, who did something, who asked a question that pushed the class forward? Let's take a moment. Let's do a little metacognitive work. How did you go about the lesson today? What did you do that helped you as a student? Did that work well?
Hmm.
Should we do that again tomorrow? How can I, as a teacher, support you more? This is one of my favorite questions in terms of SEL, kids learning.
Hmm.
How did I, as a teacher, do today to support the lesson?
Hmm.
Because being able to give an adult critical feedback that's essential to you as a kid in a respectful way is an incredible lesson, as well as it gets our metacognitive thinking going about how do we learn.
Hmm.
So SEL is not a separate curriculum. This is one of my major points. We can
Hmm.
infuse it all through a lesson by what we ask kids to pay attention to within themselves and within the group work.
Yeah, no, I think that's a way to think about it, right? Integral part of the learning and how can they either self-evaluate, evaluate how they've learned from the teacher rather than it just coming from what the teacher is perceiving from the students, like you said.
Right.
So we're working a lot now post-pandemic with increased discipline, and then a lot of schools are using restorative disciplinary practices in schools to varying degrees of success. But you said your new book is about integrating restorative discipline into schools and how can we still hold students accountable for their misbehavior? Because I think sometimes teachers feel like that restorative consequence did not help, and the kids come back and do the same behaviors.
Yeah. Okay. So true
Mhm.
for certain reasons.
Sure.
So yeah. So those of us who work in restorative practices, and definitely it's the heart of the new book coming out, is that kids are always held accountable for their behaviors. And I want to counter the current pedagogy around that
Mhm.
Putting a kid in detention does not hold them accountable for their behaviors.
Mhm.
And for those who say, well, if restorative practices, the kid does the same behavior again, I want to say if detention worked and suspension worked, sure. But in fact, those kids do those behaviors again and again.
Mhm.
Detentions and suspensions only work for a small number of kids in the school. They work for some,
Yeah.
but not for enough. So 2 kids in my class fail a test on map reading. I look at their test and I say, oh, Dana needs me to go over north, south, east, west compass stuff.
Sure.
Jeffrey needs me to go over border lines and topographical parts of a map. They don't get the same response. So in restorative practices, every kid gets the response that is most likely to change their behavior. So for some kids, that's going to be a meeting with their parents. There's going to be a behavior plan put in place. For other kids, it's going to be going back and talking with the teacher and the kids in the class and having a conversation about what happened. It's intimately important, intricately important, intrinsically important. I know I get to the right word, that teachers know what the plan is with the kids when they've been sent out of the room for something to happen. And this is one of the big failures in schools. Kids come back, the teachers don't know what their role is. Do I also get to do some disciplinary restorative stuff in my class, or has it all been taken care of already? What happened? There tend to be two splits that happen with teachers in the moment of when sending kids to the office. One is, I'm not going to do it because they're just going to get slapped on the wrist, get a candy bar,
Yeah.
hear something for a few minutes and get back to me. But there's the other side. I'm not sending the kid to the office because I don't want this kid to get detention or suspension. I want this kid to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
This kid doesn't need to be beaten down further. Somebody needs to talk with this kid and help this kid through their problems without a defined and explicit system. Everyone's working on their own.
Mhm.
And what we have, what's the tool we pull most quickly out of our toolkit because we're so busy in school, is punishment.
Mhm.
If we were ahead of that, we all had menus of what we do, and we empowered each other to choose the right things from the menu that are going to work with this kid, we'd get better relationships with kids. Instead of pushing them farther away from the misbehavior, we're actually going to pull them in towards us because we're going to make them be involved in the restoration. For instance, if a student kicks over a waste paper basket in frustration, you know what they need to do? Clean up the waste paper basket.
Yeah.
They don't need to do a detention. I can then talk to the kid about what do you do the next time you're frustrated,
Mhm.
but you cleaned up the waste paper basket. One more part of this is when we punish kids, they're just further down. They're
Yeah.
just one more step down. When we allow kids to restore themselves, they even the score and they can earn our forgiveness and entry back into the community. The other kids in the class, they're not happy if they don't know what happened with the kid who was bullying or disruptive to the class. They need to know as well that Dana did something to earn our forgiveness and their place back in the room.
Mhm.
It heals the kid, it makes them whole, the kid who was disrupted. It also says to the rest of the kids, this kid has done something to earn their way back.
Mhm.
Punishment, detention, suspensions, everyone knows that doesn't do it. The kid's just as likely to repeat their bad behavior. Restorative discipline practices are better for curriculum, they're better for relationships, and they're better for having inclusive schools. The fact that we've been doing punishments for a couple 100 years, we have enough proof that you can punish kids into dropping out. You can punish kids into the school to prison pipeline.
Yep.
Small percentage of kids you can shame, punish into holding in their behavior. But I'll say one more thing about this, Dana. For a lot of kids, the message when they get punished is not to get caught.
Yeah.
It's versus doing something different. Just don't get caught. It's not good enough.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. Like, have a consequent fit the action, right?
Yes, and the kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And one
that's
other
like,
thing about, go ahead.
I think a lot of schools are doing the restorative practice things wrong. And yeah, it's going into those things that you mentioned about finding a variety of restorative outcomes for the student rather than just, you know, doing the same old, like the
Right.
detentions and the
And
suspensions.
most importantly is the communication between the people doing the discipline and the teachers, or the teachers and then the people outside of the room. And the notion in the new book is how to go in 1 year from day one to the end of the year to get everyone on board.
Yeah.
So you don't do it overnight. It's one of the problems when we do school initiatives. We don't roll them out over a period of time and let everyone see where they have voice
Mm-hmm.
in what's going to unroll, and where they'll get training and when they'll get support. And so I don't blame teachers for being resistant to school initiatives, because basically what we say in a lot of school initiatives is you're going to be incompetent
Sure.
because we're going to ask you to do something new, give up your practice that's reasonably comfortable with you, and start something new. And I'm like, no, take a year to do it. Let everyone know what the steps are. So in the book, it's laid out chapter by chapter, chronologically. Here's how it looks over the course of a year.
Okay.
So by the end of the year, everyone's had a chance to have input, everyone's had a chance to have training, and everyone sees what everyone else's role is in the school.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes that level of school-wide integration to make everyone be on board.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about the concept of positions and interests in educators' daily work, how do we get teachers and other educators to apply this that you're advocating for a lot in your books and your writing?
Right. And I need to give a shout out to the originators of positions and interests, the guys who wrote the book Getting TS,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is just the the Bible of doing negotiation and conflict resolution. It's a short book, super readable. And so all of our work in some ways is in positions and interests. When I put a lesson plan up or writing my lesson plan, um, the interest is that my kids learn to add fractions with different denominators. Positions are strategies. Here's one way to
Mm-hmm.
do it. There's lots of ways to do it. So the idea of positions and interests is we share common interests, but we go about trying to get to them differently.
Yeah.
How do we first start talking to each other about our interests? So I'll give you an example. Well, I'm going to give you one with a teacher, one with a student. I had a wonderful staff member in my school, beloved, um, and he came to me one day after and this I was a school leader, when the class lists were done, and he said, Jeffrey, you should switch Tina out of my class. I
Mm-hmm.
want you. So that's a strategy. That's a position. And oftentimes we come to each other with just sort of a demand, a strategy, a unilateral way of doing something. And my first thought was, no way I'm doing that, because making class lists up is really hard. I have an interest in not being crazy. I have an interest in not everyone asking me to switch the kids around. Tina is one of those linchpin kids. If I move her, I'm moving a whole bunch of other kids around. And I was
Sure.
just going to say, no, Frank, can't do it. And then I realized, okay, wait, Frank, what are your interests? Because we had this language together. He just didn't come with me with his interests. And the goal is to come with interests first and then
Yeah.
share in the solution. So he said, okay, Jeffrey, I had Tina's older brother, remember? We didn't get along well. Tina's mom does not like me. So she's not likely to want to talk to me about things, and we're going to get off on a bad foot. Tina has some reading difficulties, and the cohort of kids, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to her the way she needs to be gotten to. So I can stop and say, you know what? I share every one of those interests with Frank.
Mm-hmm.
I want Tina to have a good year. I want Frank to have a good year. The teacher, I want him to have a good year. I want Tina's mother to be brought back into the community better. I want Tina to become a better reader. We share all those interests.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Frank's strategy isn't working for me. But I could say, you know what, Frank, there are other strategies. I happen to know that the reading specialist has an opening in her caseload. What if you and her collaborate on working with Tina? The first phone call you have with Tina's mom is with the reading specialist, and she can help you do the reading work with Tina all year. And Frank
Mm-hmm.
goes, oh man, thank you so much. I just needed something. So a lot in schools, we come at each other quickly with strategies versus saying, here are my interests. How can I get them met?
Sure.
So now when staff come to me in the school knowing this, they can say, Jeffrey, I have these interests. I have an idea how to do it. I'm like, oh, I share all those interests. maybe I have other ideas too when we move forward together versus me saying yes or no and setting it up as a win-lose. I'll give you one with a kid because I taught my middle and high school students this language.
Hmm.
So when they would say something to me, Mr. B, can we do this? I'm like, where does that meet my interests? Like, tell me how that helps me run the class better because that's my interest. Because I'm not hearing that helping me do my work.
Hmm.
So one time, my class is dismissed. I'm writing on the board horribly between periods, and a lovely student comes to the door. Maybe she was an eighth grader, and she says, "Mr. B, I forgot to get the pass to go to the nurse to get my medication." I'm writing on the board frantically, and I look at her like, and wise young woman, she says, "Mr. B, would it be your interest if I wrote out the whole pass and you just signed it?" I said,
Yeah.
"Absolutely." She wrote the pass, I signed it because she could see in that moment I had this
Sure.
other interest.
Sure.
Um, it's endlessly useful if we talk with each other about interests first. Like, I'll give you another example. A lot of times when we have parents coming into school, let's say there's been a bullying investigation, and they come in, and I can start the meeting by saying, I need to share with you some of my interests for this meeting. One of my interests is I have to go through the legal requirements of an investigation. And I want you to know I need to do that.
Hmm.
I also want to let you know I have an interest that your kid will be treated with exquisite respect through this entire investigation. I want you to know I have an interest that you will be listened to with exquisite respect through
Hmm.
this entire investigation. I want you to know I have an interest that you will get to know the outcomes of this as soon as anyone else does, and that I have an interest as well that we find some agreement about what's going forward. Because parents are coming in thinking they're going to have to fight for their kid. And I want to say right up front, your kid's going to be treated with exquisite respect. So when we start meetings off, being able to say, I want to lay out what the interests of this meeting are. It's too often we come in schools, and especially like bullying investigations, and we sound like bureaucrats. We're checking off a list, we're going through stuff. Parents have other interests coming in. If I can join them and say, I share those interests, I can do the business of the school and pull them in, as well as honor those interests. I once had a parent come into my school really angry with me about something because a lot of times it's the only way they can get in. And I learned, and I said to them, you know what? I wish every parent came in as righteously defending their kid as you are. Not enough of them do that. I am really happy you're here, righteously defending your kid's needs. I support you in doing that. Let's sit down and talk about it. Because I really believe that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I wish everyone was as righteously, defending the kids. Luckily, not everyone is coming in angry. So, I'm not opening the floodgates. It was for that person in that moment, they needed to hear that I was as upset with the situation as they were.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
share that interest.
Yeah, and you're talking about the students' parents who are coming in and advocating, but in terms of student voice, a lot of the time in schools, we're not supporting their voice if they're wanting to advocate for themselves or teaching them more about advocating for themselves. So how can we make that more explicitly taught in self-advocation, regulation, and advocacy?
Gotcha. So, and this again, folks who are watching can write to me at my website and I can give you the list. Um, kids don't, some kids know a little bit about what would help, but we can make that very explicit, saying in this classroom, these are ways that you can advocate for your needs. If you need to stand up and stretch your legs, there's a place in this classroom to do that. If you need to put your head down for 2 minutes and take a break, you can do that. I imagine a school system in which kids in kindergarten to second grade are getting a menu of ways they can advocate for themselves. And there's another menu in 5 through 7, and another menu 8 through 10, and another menu 11 through 12 to say, these are the ways you can advocate for yourself in these classrooms. Now, in certain classrooms, it's going to be different. In the wood shop, in the chemistry lab, in the gym, some of those ways of advocating for yourself aren't going to be applicable, but others would be. Um, I don't want kids to be guessing. I want them to say, here. So there's lists of, and then teachers, this is what some of my work in schools, sometimes it's across a grade level. everyone's going to post the same things and teach the kids how to do that. In middle school, it's great because kids will operate on teams, and teams are like separate little countries that have their own constitutions. So imagine if all the kids in a middle school team heard every day when they walked into class, remember to advocate if you want to use line paper or graph paper or blank paper to do that. Remember if you need your directions repeated to do that. They should be hearing that as often as don't forget to put your name on top of the paper.
Yeah, and I think a lot of time teachers forget of those things that need to be explicitly taught. They expect kids know that. I wanted
Can
to
I
ask
just say
if you
something about that? Because
go ahead.
we have to come back to this. This is a cultural thing. We run schools a lot on implicit cultural beliefs of what kids know about what they can ask adults, what they can ask their peers. We should always have been more explicit about that, and not expect that kids know. Sometimes when I say to teachers, I give them the list and they say, oh, my kids know they can do that. And I say, could you tell me how often this year anybody has asked for any of those things? Make it more explicit, make it safe, make it brave. So the first time a kid says, Mr. B, can I sit by the window? I'm like, absolutely. That's how we roll in this class. People ask for where they need to sit. And you make that kid the hero of the moment.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good way of having kids self-advocate, letting them know what they can ask for. So you are writing, you're coaching. Do you have any public speaking engagements coming up in early spring at different conferences like ASCD? I know you'll probably be there, but otherwise,
Right. That's the next big one I have coming up, ASCD March in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to be talking through the new book, kind of
okay.
going through the steps of that. That's the next big one. Most of my work, and I'm happy to say this, I love that I do workshops here and there, and I do conferences. My favorite work is working over time with the school system, working with the leaders, working with the teachers. Everyone knows to some degree that when you come in as a workshop leader or doing a keynote, you pop in and out. And I always say to the school leaders, I want to know that a year from now, you don't look and say, hey, Jeffrey came in and I don't see any impact. I like to work with how do we embed the work that we come in doing workshops or keynotes into the life of the school.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite work. So I work longer in school systems than a lot of people do. I prefer to do fewer going out to kind of, flying all over the country, doing sexy work and working in systems where I can work and embed. Yes, I'm happy to go in as well and do a one shot. Sometimes it's true. Staff just need a little punch up of inspiration and energy from an outside person. Happy to do that because it's true as well. They just need a little more keep doing, keep on keeping on. You're doing great work. Happy to do that. Happy to do the follow up with that even more.
Sure, sure. No, that's you don't want to do the one and done, right? It's good that you're staying with them, following up, making sure things are being carried through. I think we've
Right.
had a great conversation today on just your areas of expertise, some of your writing, a little bit about your new book. Out of everything we talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
When you're working with any kid,
Yeah.
sometimes there's an overwhelm of everything we have to do and all of the things going on in the whole school, all the things going on in the community, all the things that haven't gotten done yet. But one of the wonderful things about working in schools is you can always look at the kid or the kids in front of you and say, right now, how can I best take care of this kid?
Mm-hmm.
How can I leave this interaction as best as possible? It's always there for us.
Yeah.
In the midst of all the other craziness, is look at the kid in front of you, do best by that kid, and you will walk away feeling like that's why I came into this profession, to do best by the kids in front of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
As often as we can do that in the midst of the craziness, we'll keep on keeping on. We'll hang in.
Yeah. Yeah. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
Through my website, jeffreybenson.org. You can also write to me, info@jeffreybenson.org. I
Okay.
love to be in touch with educators. If I wasn't talking to Dana now, I'd be washing my dishes or vacuuming or something like that. I would much rather talk about education, and I'm trying to upload everything. Some point I'll retire. I'm trying to upload 50 years of doing this, get it
Yeah.
out there for people who can use it.
Great. I'll put that in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being my guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. We had just a snippet of what you are an expert in and some of your areas of expertise, but I hope people go to your website, read some of your books and articles, and connect with you further. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dana. Maybe I'll see you at the ASCD in Washington.